Been a hot minute, hasn't it? Hey everybody, it's me again, here to deliver a channel update, I guess. I wouldn't really consider it one of those specifically for reasons you'll see here pretty soon, but I do want to just tell you guys about what's been going on behind the scenes for the past 5 years or so. When I first started this channel back in 2015, I actually wanted it to be my namesake, something akin to Markiplier or something like that. So, for the first 8 months or so, that's exactly what I did. I did Let's Play videos with the occasional random bullshit. I only had a phone though, so that did limit me a bit for a while there. But eventually, things happened, namely somebody factory reset my phone and I borrowed my mother's laptop as a temporary, and suddenly, I was into Doom modding. At that moment, things changed with the channel. I was still doing random bullshit alongside Doom modding now, but there was less focus on Let's Plays. I never considered that the worst thing for me to do, though, even after I took a break from GamingMarine and Doom for a while. But nevertheless, my channel's name was very slowly starting to lose its meaning. 2017 to mid-2019 is what I'd consider my golden era. I was just doing so much stuff left and right. I was still doing gaming stuff, soundtrack uploads, stuff like that. I did the Brony Cringe with GamingMarine series, which, if I'm honest, I don't look back on the most fondly. I got my first gaming PC for Christmas, which really helped things a lot. It was a good time. Until we moved in the summer of 2019. It was a very small house, and I couldn't really get my desktop set up the way I wanted it to be, so for the most of the time I was there, I just used a new laptop. An awful lot happened during that period. COVID-19, obviously, and I started to put all my focus specifically into Doom modding. My ADHD got worse, I think, during this time. I just barely ever had any motivation to do much of anything. I never really made any videos in that time. And probably the worst, I'd say, I deleted a sizable chunk of my older videos because I thought they were just irrelevant. In retrospect, I wish I just privated them instead, so I at least had them on board if I wanted to bring them back. It also really stung that I never backed up any of my old videos. I really had a Nintendo philosophy when it came to preserving my history, so for all I know, this is lost media now. Fast forward to 2023, and things are getting a little better. We moved once again to a new house, and while I'm still limited to just a laptop, I'm out of school now with a technical form of income, so I can buy whatever the hell I want now. And with that, one grandmother gifting me some random game controllers for Christmas and a subsequent trip to the store she got them from later, what happened to me? So, I'm into collecting old video games now. It's not a ginormous collection like you would imagine, but I still got a lot of good stuff in here for a collection that I started, 10 months ago? Doing this sort of thing has been a dream of mine for quite a while now, keyword there being a dream. Right now I'm mainly focusing on getting 8-bit and 16-bit games, as I feel that's been my G-spot for video games. Later on, once I've broken from my family, I'm gonna start collecting for systems I actually had as a kid, namely Wii and 3DS. And maybe I'll even get into systems I just missed out on in school, like Nintendo Switch. With all that being said, I'm hoping I can bring back some of the original spirit of this channel now that I've gotten back into gaming. I know this is going to piss off some people, but Doom modding, it's going to be on the back burner for a good while. My namesake is what I want to focus on going forward. Now, does this mean that this is going to be a 100% true return to form?
Phil, you make me angry, Phil.
No, but I am hoping I can bring back some of my original charm with this. If you clicked on this video just to find out what was going on with my channel, you can go now. But if you want to stay, the rest of this video is just going to be me rambling about my collection. I'm not going to talk about every single game in my collection, as we'd be here all day. I'm just going to focus on what I find notable. But if you're interested, here's my full library. I actually got a few Game Boy games I bought off eBay coming in here pretty soon, I hope at least. But this is what I've got as of this recording. Now, first and foremost, how exactly do I play these games, you might be wondering. I have a pretty small room, so it's not like I can just get all the consoles that I want, so I just resort to one of these. This is the Retron 5. It's one of those multi-platform consoles that plays multiple different games from multiple different consoles. It's pretty nice, but I wouldn't really consider it the best way to play. I mean, it's good for beginners, but Later on, I do want to get something else to play these old cartridges on. My main issue is that it's based on emulation. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do like emulation. I actually emulate games all the time on my laptop. But with this, you are limited to what games you can play. So stuff like, say, I don't know, the Game Boy camera, you're not really going to be able to play that on this thing. And also, whenever you want to play a game, you have to wait for it to actually dump the contents of the cartridge first. For some games, it's not that big of a deal, but for stuff like, say, Game Boy Advance, that takes a while. It comes with this controller, though. Do not use this controller, even if we ignore the fact that it takes a tedious amount of time to get this thing to pair with the console. The controls themselves, like, I mean, they're okay, but like, the labels and the face buttons don't make a whole lot of sense. And the D-pad, well, instead of a D-pad, you just get this, like, concave micro-switch thumbstick. Who wants to play Mario with this thing? So I just bought some wired controllers off Amazon instead. And this controller's pretty nice. There's actually some bumps on the back of the controller, so it's a little easier to hold, but it's an NES controller, so that's not saying a whole lot. Genesis controller, it's fine. My biggest issue is with the D-pad. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like pressing left and right is extremely sensitive, and for stuff like columns, that's absolutely infuriating. So most of the time I just play with the Super Nintendo controller. I like Super Nintendo controllers in general, but it's just really nice to play games with this, even if not all games use this button layout. But pretty early on, I realized that I'm not giving the Game Boy line a whole lot of love in this collection. I've only got one Game Boy game on hand, and on the Retron 5, yeah, it's not very pleasant. So, just a few weeks ago, as of this recording, I got one of these. I know what you're thinking. GamingMarine, you must be filthy rich to buy one of these. Well, it was actually in stock on the Analog website, so I mean, I did spend more than I did on the Retron 5, but still, it's not scalper prices that I paid. This is a very nice feeling console, but my big issue with this is with the cartridge slot. First and foremost, there's no dust cover, and I mean, that's pretty standard. OG Game Boys didn't have that, but it's very, like, protruded up compared to regular Game Boys. I mean, with Game Boy Advance, it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't block the, shoulder buttons or anything like that. But with Game Boy and Game Boy Color, which I don't have any of right now, that's probably going to be a problem. And now, with all that out of the way, we can finally talk about what I'm mainly focusing on here. The games. I have my laptop just out of shot. It just has a list of games I want to talk about. And I figure I may as well talk about probably the most obvious one in my library. Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. There's more copies of this out there than there exist blades of grass. I got this game during my very first game store trip, and if I'm honest, I'm not gonna feel bad about selling this sometime soon. First and foremost, I have no way of playing Duck Hunt even if I had a zapper, because my TV is an LCD screen. Not to mention that I ended up getting Super Mario All-Stars later on. Sure, it's not the original Super Mario Brothers experience. I mean, there's actually some different physics that some people don't like about this collection. But hey, it's 4 games in 1 cartridge, and you can save your game. So, what's really the point of having this still? You know what I mean? What I've got a little more to talk about is Space Invaders. I got this during one trip where I couldn't find anything that interested me. All they had there was just Vegas Stakes, Zoop, and Bases Loaded, and this was pretty much the only game that they had that I was kind of interested in getting. I knew nothing about this specific cartridge. I just got it thinking, it's Space Invaders, how could you screw that up? And now that I've actually spent some time with it, it's not actually bad, but I imagine this only exists for like a very niche audience, because technically speaking, this specific version of Space Invaders was already on Super Nintendo. Space Invaders on the Game Boy is a pretty notable title in that platform's library. I mean, on a regular-ass Game Boy, it's nothing to write home about. But if you insert that into a Super Game Boy, which was an accessory for the Super Nintendo for the uninitiated, you just got a completely different version of Space Invaders, which was pretty cool. And this is basically just that Super Game Boy portion of Space Invaders on its own cartridge. This was released in 1997, one of the very last SNES games, if I'm not mistaken. If you want an idea of how late that is, the ESRB rating on this is an E, as opposed to like KA as earlier titles would have been. So my best guess here is that this is for those who never got a Super Game Boy, but wanted to play Space Invaders on their Super Nintendo. I don't know. Here's a really interesting one for me. This is Zero Tolerance on the Sega Genesis. This is pretty cool because this is a first-person shooter, which there wasn't a whole lot of on the Sega Genesis. It's actually pretty cool. It's sort of like a Corridor 7 if it was actually good. My only issue with it is the password system. I don't think passwords are inherently bad, even if I was born at a time where we were fully into save states and whatnot. But in order to get a password, you have to kill every single enemy on a level. And as someone who finishes FPS levels with a few stragglers more often than not, that's pretty annoying. It's fucking Pac-Man. What more do you want from me? In terms of the actual game, there's literally nothing I could say. It's Pac-Man. I know what it is. You know what it is. I think the more interesting thing to talk about with this cartridge specifically is the history behind it, because on official hardware, there was 4 different releases of this exact same port of Pac-Man. So first, Namco released it on the Famicom in 1984, pretty early in that console's life, and, you know, that's to be expected. But in 1988, Atari, under their console label, Tengen, released this in the United States. And then like a year later, they're like, man, Nintendo's rules suck. You have to buy your own cartridges for them. You can only release so many games in 1 year. Man, it should be like the old times when we had fucking revenge porn on our console. So, they lied to the US government to get a copy of Nintendo's patent for the console's lockout chip, created their own based on that, and started releasing their own cartridges. It wasn't very long before they had to stop doing that, but in 1993, which was towards the end of the NES's lifetime, Namco decided to just re-release Pac-Man. The version I have here is the licensed Tengen version, which was before they started making their own, like, unlicensed cartridges. So in terms of history, I'd say this is pretty interesting, but in terms of the actual game, it's just Pac-Man. What more do you want me to say? And while we're on the topic of Tengen, Roadrunner on the NES. I have no idea how I'm gonna display this in this video. Do I just hold it with the pins facing down like a regular ass cartridge, or do I hold it like this so you can actually see the label? It's an unlicensed NES game. I wanted at least one of these in my collection because, unlike certain people, I actually like having games that stick out visually. Funny story, so when I first added this game to my wish list of old games to consider getting, I told a very close friend of mine about it, and I asked him what his thoughts were, and he was like, oh man, you should get their port of Tetris as well. And I was like, no. Not to mention, I already had Tetris and Dr. Mario at this point, so like, what would be the point? May as well talk about it while I'm here. This cartridge is also pretty interesting because it's a player's choice release. These were like budgetary re-releases of these games when they sold like a specific amount of copies. And I think they look pretty cool on the shelf because there's this little line that's colored gold, and typically for Super Nintendo games, if this line is red, it's published by Nintendo, or at the very least by a first-party publisher. If it's purple, then it's a third-party published game. But like I said, gold helps it stick out a bit more. I highly doubt a lot of people knew about that until I mentioned it, but hey, what are you gonna do? A big concern I have when it comes to collecting games is what condition they're in, and early on, I just did not give a damn. For example, can you even tell what game this is? This is Williams Arcade's Greatest Hits. I got this in my first batch of games alongside Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt, and man, I want to know what story this game has. You good, dude? But I did wise up a little and did get a little more cautious about what I'm buying. somewhat. Here's Cool Spot to demonstrate that. I bought this at a game store in Nevada. They had it on display in the back shelf, so I thought, man, this must be in really good condition. And on the way home, I pulled it out of my shopping bag. Where the fuck is the end label? So, from that day going forward, I learned that you should really be looking at what you're about to buy, no matter what. Another thing I just get really paranoid about is if someone comes over and plays my game, I'm just going, please, for the love of all that is holy, tell me that they are sanitary people. My sister's kids came over a few months back, and one of them, who was like 7 or 8 years old, I think, he really wanted to play on my system, and the game that he pulled out of my shelf was Donkey Kong Country, which I consider one of my favorite games in my library. Funny how I used to be obsessed with Sega things, and now half of my library is just Super Nintendo. But yeah, he pulled it out of my shelf, put it in my console, picked up my controller, and started playing. It was pretty sweet, but then I thought, these are kids that are playing. Do they even wash their hands? So I asked him, hey, do you wash your hands? And he's like, yeah, totally. I asked the other kids, and they're like, no way, dude. He doesn't even wash his hands or wipe his ass. And at that point, I was just so goddamn paranoid. So once he was done playing, I rushed to the bathroom, took Donkey Kong Country and the games that were surrounding it, as well as the controller, and just wiped them top to bottom with disinfectant. Because it's like, I don't care if they're kids, don't do that shit to my collection, you know? And I think that's all I wanted to talk about for this video. Sorry about the announcement with Doom modding, but personally, I feel more comfortable focusing on this. If you want to be a little more up to date about both, alongside my mental episodes, I guess, go check out my Blue Sky page. It's not nearly as active as my Twitter page was, but it still fills in the same niches, I guess. But yeah, that's about it. See you guys later. Here's to a better future.